Lots of things you never heard before. Coming right up on the Gap Songs Show. But today we have Wyatt Easterling.
That's correct.
Yes, and Wyatt is already telling us some information about his background. How did you get started?
Well, I knew when I was a kid that I wanted to be a singer. My family was living at the time in Los Angeles. I was born in the South. I was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but we actually came through Nashville while my dad did a couple of years with the Air Force. He was their flight surgeon at a place called Seward Air Force Base, which is in Smyrna, Tennessee, about between here and Murfreesboro. It's just 10 miles out of town.
Right.
But it was an Air Force base, and from there we went out to Los Angeles, where my father continued his medical training. And so I had a year and a half in Los Angeles around all of these stars. They were, you see them on TV, but you'd see them in the grocery store, and I thought, well, that has got to be a fun business or occupation. Yeah, I didn't worry about money back then. I was 6 years old, so money was the last thing on my mind. But it was fun to see like Bob Denver, who was Gilligan, and the like. But we moved back to North Carolina. My father was asked by Ike Taylor, who is James Taylor's father, to come back to the medical school and be a part of their Department of Obstetrics. So I got back to Chapel Hill, and James is 10 years older than me, so he was already into guitar, and I didn't know him, but I idolized him because he was Ike Taylor's son, and Ike was the coolest guy because he always had a harmonica in his coat pocket. So I see where James and Livingston and Kate and Hugh and how they all got their talent for the stage. They got them from Dad. I decided early on that I wanted to be a singer, and started thinking around 15 years old, well, if I'm going to do this, I better start learning how to play the guitar. So I started teaching myself. Then I had a very fortunate meeting in my junior high with a fellow named John Loudermilk III. I have to stop and think junior third. He was the third. His father was John D. Loudermilk, the songwriter here in Nashville, who was revered in Nashville. He was from that class of songwriters that was also an artist. He and Chet Atkins were very close friends, and everybody in town just adored John Sr. Well, John D. Sr., Jr. Third. John Loudermilk the third, John D. He and I moved out to Nashville in about 1981. We were both pups. We were probably 20 years old, 1920. And he proceeded to build a recording studio, and I helped him with that. It was a full-fledged 24-track. Fortunately for John, he had grandparents with deep pockets, and they were willing to set him up. Since he wasn't going to college, they helped him put the studio together. And off the cuff, immediately we started doing some of Chet Atkins recordings. We had all the right equipment. It was very close to RCA, and he'd pop over to do a little bit of this, that, and the other. Of course, he would use the studio over at RCA quite a bit, but it was a great introduction into town. We'd go out to the Opry every weekend and hang out backstage, and I got to meet all of the greats. Roy Acuff was held court there. He ran the show, but Lester Flatt, Earl Scruggs, Conway Twitty, the Carol Lee Singers, Dolly was out there occasionally, Loretta Lynn, all of the greats. And it was one big family. And we would go out there so often that we just got to be known by everyone, and we're just hanging out and learning the business. It's a wonderful way to be introduced to this town. But you have to make your own way. And I worked at the studio for a couple of years, and then I was about to sign with CBS Records. Rick Blackburn, who was the label chief, was about to sign me, and Sony bought him. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then the next thing I know, the whole staff was replaced with incoming folks for Sony. Well, Rick had a non-compete, which is commonplace. He could not work for a record label for 2 years because of his severance. And so he opened a publishing house, and I started writing for his publishing company. A few years later, which was great because suddenly I had a home for my songs, and I also I began to meet other songwriters that I would write with. And I really learned to write in those 2 years. It was a different type of writing than what I'd been accustomed to. I wrote a song called Life's So Funny that Rick was very pleased with, and he took that all around town. So I started to get my name out there a little bit. Well, Atlantic Records comes along, and I thought, well, great, I've got an opportunity again to have a record label pick up my material and push me out there. I remember I was playing tennis a lot in those days, and Rick was an avid tennis player, and we were over at the tennis courts playing, and I was beating him, which was unusual because he was like hitting just a wall. He was always going to send it back. And he walks up to the net and he says, by the way, Atlantic Records wants me to head up their new division here. And I said, that's what I've heard. I think that's great. As he's walking away, he says, yeah, I want you to head up the A&R department. I said, well, I'm sorry, what'd you say? Needless to say, the game went straight down the tubes from there. He soundly beat me. But that's okay, because I had lots to think about for the next few days. I said, let me give you an answer in about 2 or 3 days. And I thought about it, and what I loved was that Chet Atkins who was one of my heroes, had been an A&R man. And I thought, this is an opportunity that only comes around once in life. Right. This was Atlantic Records, which was my favorite label. Atlantic had all of the greats, Ray Charles, it had Led Zeppelin, it had Phil Collins, it had just, you name it.
Yeah,
they
sure.
were on that label. It was an amazing, Aretha Franklin. And it had Ahmet Ertegun. How could you go wrong? So I thought about it just maybe a day, and I called Rick up and said, I'll take it. When do we start? Mm-hmm. And that changed my life almost immediately. Suddenly everybody thought I had come out of LA for some reason. I don't know why. But, that's the kind of position that gives you a profile immediately, because everybody's clamoring to get songs to you. And,
Sure.
You hear good and bad. I heard I was called a 10-eared explicative. I was called many things. They play a song and I didn't like it for whoever I was looking for,
okay.
and they thought, he can't hear anything. But I really enjoyed it. It fit well with my background. My father was a dean and was very involved in administrative type work, and I kind of had a knack for that. I'm far more comfortable on the creative side, but I was the head of the creative part of Atlantic Records.
Right.
My first signing was John Michael Montgomery, which was not bad. Out of the chute, he was the highest debut selling artist in country for a period of time. I co-produced that album, Life's a Dance. And then I brought in Tracy Lawrence and Neil McCoy. And Michael Johnson was the last signing I had. And, as often happens, a job like that runs its course, and I left Atlantic. And almost immediately, within 2 or 3 months, I got a call from a fellow named Miles Copeland out in L.A.
Name is very familiar.
Miles, it was to me as well, but I didn't know much about. I had blinders on. I was all about Nashville and what was going on those 2 streets over there.
With your job.
And it was all I cared about.
Yeah.
I mean, I liked some of the music, but I wasn't into punk and I wasn't into wave that much. I was really a singer-songwriter, storyteller. So I did a little research before I went out and met with Miles, and he owned IRS Records, which had the Bangles and the Go-Go's and R.E.M. and Timbuk3, all these great acts that I did enjoy their music. I just didn't follow them that closely. But we met out in L.A. and decided to partner up, and so I opened up a Bugle publishing group here in town. He had one in L.A., Nashville, London, and Paris. So we were pretty spread across the globe. But the coolest thing with that opportunity was Miles. I didn't know the guy. He's a bit of a bull in a china shop at times, but he came through Nashville on his way to London and stopped in and said, "Hey, now that we've signed these songwriters, what are we going to do with them?" And I was kind of caught off guard a little bit, and I thought, well, obviously we won't have them write until we have something to pitch.
Right.
And then I just had this brainchild for a moment because I was covering my ass, and I said, I would like to put together a songwriting retreat. And I won't say what he said, but he says, "What the heck is that?" And I said, "Well, you have IRS records. We've got songwriters. Bring your artist into town. We'll put them up at a state park or something like that, and let them write. And when they finish, the artist will go home with new songs. We'll have the publishing. You'll have the artist with there."
Thanks for tuning in tonight, my friends. Hope to see you coming round again. Make sure to tell